Hello everyone, thank you for coming today and watching my video. And most of all, thank you, Miss LaNita Wright, for being here. Mrs. LaNita Wright for being here, okay? She's a married woman now. I appreciate you for being here and taking time out of your day with all the things that you got going, researcher, professor, directoring, and things. So thank you. And yeah, I
Thank you
just
for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, yes. I want to read off your bio before we get started. If anything, just to highlight a little small depth of what you do, and then we can get into it, okay?
Okay.
Dr. Wright is an associate professor of public health and public health program director at Kansas State University. Her research focuses on systematic influences on health promoting behaviors and outcomes. She is currently initiating community certified approaches to cervical cancer prevention and previously facilitated projects related to healthcare among Black transgender adults, medical distrust in Black communities, the Black church's role in preventing teen pregnancy, and communities members' perception of sexual health. She has partnered with research studying she has partnered with researchers studying dementia care, medical cannabis advertising, and student success. Dr. Wright also serves as editor for Health Promotion Practice, where she champions trustworthy research and advocates for unrepresented voices. Dr. Wright earned a Doctor of Philosophy in Health Promotion and a Master of Public Health and Health Promotion Services from the University of Oklahoma. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Health Services Administration from Auburn University. She also is a Master Certified Health Educator Specialist, and she's a lover of family, hiking, fresh fruits, veggies, and believes in the healing power of rest. Woo! Mrs.
Thank
Dr.
you.
LaNita. Again, thank you. I met you, I remember, and I was like 2021, COVID-ish, and it
Mhm.
was through a virtual meeting, and I was a youth initiative scholar, now called New Emerging Leaders, if I'm not mistaken, as the group. And you were presenting yourself and doing your research thing, doing the professor thing, and I'm just like, oh yeah. She's that girl. I gotta know who she is. And from there, it was you helping me with um creating my podcast questions and different thing and a different project and helping me facilitate different projects and things of that nature, me asking you questions. I remember meeting you for the first time at a NMAC UCHSA conference actually in Puerto Rico for the first
Mhm.
time. And that was really dope to put a name to a and a face to an actual body,
Mhm.
and to get to know you in that manner. So I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy, busy schedule to be here, and love you to give you the platform to highlight yourself and what you got going on.
I appreciate you so much, Ramirez, and I'm so happy that we're here today to share space, and then also just so appreciative that you've allowed me to be on this journey with you these last several years. I'm so proud of how you've blossomed and grown from a few ideas, and now you have so many ideas that have a lot of depth and warmth to them. So I'm just so excited that folks are able to experience just a small piece of what you are offering us right now. So thank you for having me today, and thank you for all that you're doing for all of us.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. I do want to get started because I know you booked and busy. So I just want to first to highlight who you are and what you're doing, and even if you want to talk about your previous projects and things like that, and what led you to what you're doing now.
Mhm. Sure. So, first of all, again, thank you for having me. And I want to start with I think it's important as professionals just to remember who you are first as a person. And so, I want to just start with, I am a person. I identify as a woman. I identify as Black. I grew up in the South. I'm from Alabama. So, I grew up eating seafood and watching college football. And that's a part of my identity. And so, I want to just start with that I am truly an advocate for staying true to who you are personally individually and also bringing your entire self to the workplace. So, professionally, as you already mentioned, I am a professor, I'm associate professor at Kennesaw State. I serve in the public health program and help to direct that program as well. And since I've arrived at Kennesaw State, I've been working to learn more about communities here in Atlanta. So I lived for 10 years in Oklahoma. So I worked with communities there and I did quite a bit of community centered work related to sexual health, sexually transmitted infection prevention, teen pregnancy prevention. Also previously worked at the local health department there in Oklahoma City as well. And I was a teen pregnancy prevention specialist. And I mentioned that because that was the job that I got right out of my graduate program, my master's program. And I was able to immediately go in and talk to middle school and high school students about sexual health, learning more about the questions that they had, what was new and emerging for them as young people. And I learned so much from them. I have such a love and appreciation for the young people I was able to serve alongside during that time frame. And it just showed me that there will continue to be growth and change in the field no matter what, right? So they were telling me some of the new slang and things that were going on that I didn't learn about right in school, but they were able to tell me some of the new things that were going on. So I would just want to point that out because it's important as professionals. If you have any interest in sexual health, just staying abreast of what is new, what's coming up in the field. I typically don't get on social media too much, so I'm really bad about this, but I rely on my students to tell me what's going on or to send me TikToks. Some people will send me things, and so I can learn about what's new. But I remember that even from the middle school and high school students that I was able to serve alongside there in Oklahoma. So um, as I in Oklahoma, I did some community centered work related to sexual health, and I still do that now in Atlanta. And you already mentioned this earlier, but one of my more recent projects that I completed was related to those who identify as Black and transgender. And I wanted to learn more from them about how identity influences their healthcare experiences and outcomes. And so you mentioned this already, but I'm really fascinated and interested in how systems influence healthcare and behavior and outcomes. So think about healthcare systems, identity systems, faith systems, family systems, peer systems. So how does all of that influence us? We don't just exist in silos and make decisions on our own, right? We are existing in these like microcosms, right? And so we have so many different things going on, many systems going on, and they're all interacting with one another. So I just wanted to just uplift that and recognize that in the work that we do and the fields that we are trying to support and move forward, we are really trying to understand those systems and what is at play here. So that's what I'm focusing on now and trying to understand more, as you already alluded to, about cervical cancer. And so that is my next area that I'm working on now, and hopefully we'll be able to share more with your viewers next year about some of the projects that we'll be launching in 2026.
Wow, that's dope. That's dope to hear all the different variations, research and the different populations that you've been into, that you've been able to kind of understand what's going on here, understand going on here, understand what's going here, and kind of develop different research and strategies to help not just understand it, but help those communities in the near future, especially because you mentioned your students who are impacted by this now and teaching you things while you're also teaching them. So that's dope. Um, I I wanted to kind of because especially where you mentioned like cervical cancer and the transgender adult projects and things like that, especially in today's limelight where rights are being taken away. How, in your words, can you explain what's going on and how your research is kind of uplifting how important those laws need to be back in place and things like that?
Hmm.
Not Again, I don't want you to feel like you have to focus too much on the actual laws themselves, but more so your research and how that it's impactful.
Hmm. So I will say, first of all, that As a public health professional, one thing that I learned in school and earlier on, even at the health department, is that you have to be a continuous learner and continue to grow and evolve with the field and with the community around you. So, what is happening now, although we are in very unusual and uncertain times that I haven't experienced in my lifetime, I also know that change is going to happen, if that makes sense. So I this is not what I would have predicted for 2025. However, I know that the only constant is change. So I do want to just share that with anyone who's listening to this and encourage you to stay in the fight, stay in the race, continue to put one foot in front of the other, and do your best to make a change in your small pocket of the United States if you're in the United States. So that's what I aim to do, is try to continue to make a difference in my little area and then see how that can continue to make a difference beyond, right? So what is happening now is that oftentimes, and this happens, sometimes in politics, there are differing opinions, but then there's also a lack of understanding about different fields as well. So, for example, I'll give you an example of something I experienced in teaching sexual health. When I was teaching sexual health, sexuality education in middle schools and high schools, I was once asked by a teacher, so someone who was serving in one of the schools, what I was going to be teaching the young people, right? And so the teacher had never seen a sexual health curriculum before, was really confused about what is the purpose of this and why are you doing it? And I didn't take offense to that. I received that as they have no idea, right? They have no idea what we're going to be talking about and they are concerned for their students, right? Although I was not in this teacher's classroom, right? I was in a classroom across the hall. They still had concerns about that. So a few of the things that the teacher said were completely untrue, right? So asking me, are you going to talk about this? Are you going to talk about that? I said, no, of course not. We're not going to talk about those things for a sexual health curriculum. We're going to focus on goals and dreams. How do you prevent unwanted, unplanned pregnancy? How do you prevent sexually transmitted infections? How do you communicate with partners about sex and sexual health? And so I walk through, these are the things we actually discussed. And if you want to take a look at my curriculum, you'll see that the majority of it is talking about skills and goals and focusing on your future and how you can inform your community, right? So a very small portion is actually on sexual health, right? Which is very interesting. And so I realized after talking with that teacher, and the teacher actually shared with me, it's like, I had no idea what you did, right? And so I immediately came in ready to be on the teacher was ready to be on the defense and say, how can I, really convey why I'm upset about this and why is this happening in my school? But then after we had that conversation, very brief, 5 or 10 minute conversation, this was a champion for me in the school. So I thought that was really interesting that sometimes we have differences of opinion because we don't understand. We are ignorant to what is actually happening. And so if we fast forward to 2025, I think a part of what's happening is some ignorance to what is happening, right? Even in public health, right? So ignorance to what is public health, what do you do in public health, what does the funding do? Why do you need funding? All of that is important. And I think it's important as public health professionals to do a better job of communicating the relevance and the importance of public health to lay audiences. Because if I talk in acronyms and I talk in, public health jargon, that's not really going to be helpful for folks who didn't necessarily study public health, who might not care what certain things mean, right? They care about themselves, their family, their friends, their communities. So how are you communicating that to the wider audiences? So I think that's one thing that's going on, is that public health has not done here recently, had not done a really great job with communicating. And we can say specifically about COVID-19 and vaccine, there was a lot of vaccine resistance and hesitancy. That was one of the projects I worked on with a student a student researcher in the DMV area. So just kind of learning about vaccine hesitancy and resistance, and what's going on there. And what continued to come up was the lack of communication and miscommunication from public health professionals. So I think that's a big part of some lingering disgust, right, with the public health field. And so we're still dealing with that, right? So I think that's a big piece of what's happening. So if there's already some disgust with that going on, then we can also have folks saying, well, I want something completely new and different from what was happening before. Because if you were in charge and you did it this way and I still didn't know what was going on, I'm just going to shift over here and see what this other person is talking about, or this other party, or, whatever is going on. And so I think that's also a part of what has happened is there was some disdain and distrust, not only in public health, of course, but just generally, with several other professionals who were either in office or in leadership positions. And that disdain or distrust, led to folks saying, I want something different. And so that's another piece. And then I would say, lastly, what we're dealing with now is, as going back to what I mentioned before about if folks don't know what you do, they don't know how to explain what you do, they don't see the relevance in what you do. So if someone is in leadership and is in power and they don't know what you do with the research dollars that you have. So why do you need a research center? We could just take that money away and give it to another group because I don't understand what you're doing. So that seems to be what's happening, is that there's a lot of loss of funding for specifically for sexual health programming. We'll speak to that. HIV funding specifically, even vaccine funding, very necessary and critical services for our nation, and what has helped our nation to continue to work towards a healthier place. The funding is being stripped away. And I do think a big part of that is a lack of understanding, but then also not only for the field, but then a lack of understanding for the people involved with that work. So it is confusing. I don't have all the answers by any means. It's something that we're all navigating together right now. I have many colleagues who've lost all of their funding to do their research projects. I know I personally am trying to figure out how to word the proposals, how, what sort of words can I say in the proposals to figure out what will be appropriate and palatable to people who will be reviewing this proposal. So, that is something that is unusual. So we were told to not say certain words, like we couldn't talk about gender, we couldn't talk about race. There are certain things you couldn't put in proposals. But then now you can, but you have to talk about the scientific merit behind that. So why are you talking about race? Why are you talking about gender? Things of that nature. So there's mixed messaging, right, related to current policies, and it feels unsettling. So I don't feel like I have solid footing on the ground right now, and I'm sure many other researchers probably feel that way too. So again, I don't have all the answers. That's just what I've seen, that has happened in the last several years. I don't think it's only 2025. So I think the last several years there have been issues going on. But as I mentioned before, the only constant is change. So I know a change is coming. So I'm going to continue to do, and I would encourage others to continue to do the work, to continue to advocate for what is important, to continue to rest. I think rest is a form of resistance. So allowing yourself to rest and digest and really process what is happening, process how you're feeling, journaling, just taking that time to really think through what is going on so that you can show up in whatever form you want to show up in the next day, right? Show up in a better space, the next day. So that is important, to not get lost in everything that's going on and be so overwhelmed, because I personally have experienced that. And I know many of my colleagues have experienced just the overwhelming weight of all of the change and everything that's going on. So that's what I would say to that.
No, I feel like you answered that greatly, and you really like summed up the midst of what you were on saying. If people don't know and don't understand, then they're going to look away, and that gives the, oh, not the okay, but that gives the people who have the authority be like, oh, then you guys don't need that, or this doesn't need that, and let's put this somewhere else, and not really explains a lot of why they're trying to make sure people are miseducated or misinformed or don't understand or just blatantly confused. So it leads to the disdain that you missed, and or or the distastefulness that they have, which leads to the distrust that they have, and it's just a echoing effect, and it just goes down and down, down, down. So
Mhm.
it's people like you that are doing the work behind the scenes to make sure that the people in the front lines can actually understand and articulate, hey, this is what's going on based off what people who are doing the work because they care about doing the work, not because it's just about filling a quota or things like that. It's about because they care and things like
Mhm.
that. And with that being said, I want to ask you, how can people get informed? How can people understand what's going on? What resources are out there so people can, whether that's be a part of it or just read about it or just send it to someone who might need it? Are there any things that you can mention that, whether it's something that you're a part of or that you've read? And I know you said, Miss Director of the Health Promotion, highlighting that and things like that. So I'd love to give that spotlight and the time for that.
Mhm. So I will first of all say if you have any sort of interest, so if you're thinking about something that you want to get more involved in, it sounds very cliche and simple, but I would literally just search first on the internet and see what you can find who's doing that type of work right now. Um, Thankfully now we have access to so many different things, so many different things. So we're able to really find different folks and see what they're doing, and don't be afraid to reach out. So I think a big part of it is figuring out what lane you want to be in and then trying to dig and figure out who's doing the work. And I'll give you an example of that. So I'm interested in sexual health indicators, outcomes, behaviors in other nations and other countries, and trying to figure out what's happening there and then how I can help to inform what's happening here in the United States, right? So I'm really interested in that. I would love to take students along the journey, along with me on that journey to figure out what's going on elsewhere, right? And how can we better inform what's happening here in the United States? So literally, my husband was listening to me talk about it and said, I'm thinking about this, I'm dreaming about this. And he just started typing in, just started Googling, looking on the internet and figuring out okay, I'm going to see. He's not in my field. He doesn't really know, a lot of the things that I have going on, but he listens. And so he just looked and said, okay, let me see what I can find online. And he found a group who was hosting a study abroad for researchers, for practitioners, for therapists, for students, for whoever wanted to come. They were hosting a study abroad trip in Amsterdam. And so I reached out. He said, you should reach out to them because this sounds like something that you want to do. And so I reached out. It's called the Sexual Health Alliance. I reached out to the person who was organizing the trip, and I asked, could I shadow you? Can I learn more about the project? And then he said, why don't you just come with me on the trip? And I was like, you know what? That would be better. Instead of just meeting about it, I should just come on the trip with you. Right. And so something as simple as looking to see what somebody else is doing, right? And then reaching out to see what the opportunities are, it might lead to you actually doing the thing that you wanted to do in the first place, right? You did the same thing. So you reached out to me, right? We were just had a session with the youth initiative. We were talking about different career paths and things like that. And then you emailed me, right? And so you reached out to me, we talked about it. That led to us having additional conversations, you creating the podcast, you creating initiatives there in your home area, you starting a community group. You've done so many things from and nothing to do with me. So I get no credit, but it's just the fact that you followed your own passion and your lead and said, I'm going to ask these questions and then see how that can lead to these other things. So I just would encourage anyone to not lose sight of, and it seems so simple, but don't lose sight of literally just looking up to see what's currently happening and then reaching out to the people to see if they could take on a mentee or if they would talk to you for 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever the case might be. They might love to talk about the work that they do. Usually people enjoy talking about the work that they do, right? Especially if they're passionate and they're in a field that you're passionate about, they probably want to talk to you about it. So I would just say reach out. That's my first advice, number one. I think there are, of course, depending on the field, so it might be difficult to say specific organizations, but I would just say look into organizations who are leaders in your field. So, for example, in public health, there are a few organizations that are helping to lead the charge related to advocacy, related to connecting other public health and health promotion practitioners. So, for example, the Society for Public Health Education, the American Public Health Association, NMAC, Sexual Health Alliance. There are specific organizations who are helping to kind of lead that charge, right? And so by looking at those organizations, and those are just a few, and again, I'm interested more in sexual health and youth development. So I have organizations that are more related to that. But if someone's interested in environmental health or occupational health or whatever the case might be, then look up those specific organizations and see how you can get involved with them. Oftentimes organizations like that have internships, and so you might have to be a student or you might not have to be a student. So you could reach out and see if you could shadow, if you could volunteer, if the ones I mentioned typically have volunteer opportunities. So you might be able to volunteer to learn a little bit more about what's happening with that organization. And then I would just say a big part of what has led me to today is my intersecting identities, right? And so I paid attention to how my intersecting identities were influencing my work. So I mentioned before about systems and influencing health care and health outcomes. Previously in Oklahoma, I served as a youth director in a church, and that led to me talking a lot to young people just about everything, right? And so talking to them all the time, meeting with them every week, I was really fascinated with what more we could do related to sexual health and talking to them, and they wanted more information, but they didn't know who to ask those questions. And so that led me to really thinking about, okay, what is the church's role in sexuality and sexual health? And that led to multiple projects, right? And then thinking about how I can help to inform others, not only me, but working with other people to help inform others, right? So I would just, again, encourage you to, anyone who's listening, to think about the intersecting identities and don't lose sight of that. Bring your whole self to work or to play or wherever you are. Bring your whole self and then think about what you're actually interested in shifting into the coming years. I'm still interested in faith and sexuality. I'm still interested in identity. I'm still interested in healthcare, right? So it doesn't mean that something goes away. It just means that you might have a few different things, few different projects going on that will, blossom when the time is right. Right. And so I would just encourage folks to just write down your interest. So again, it seems so simple, but just write down your interests so that you can remember what you're interested in. And then also think about how, again, how those things are related and then how you can influence those around you.
So it sounds like essentially like you just, as long as you're interested, you are proactive about it, and you're making sure that you are looking for people who are trustworthy and credible, that there's a way in the door. Um, And it might not be the smoothest way, but there's a way in the door, especially in today's time. And I'm very happy for that because, like you mentioned, that's how I did meet you. That's how I met a lot of people. And you mentioned a lot of organizations and things. And I want to also highlight Advocates for Youth. That's how I was able to be a part of Advocates for Youth from word of mouth and being a student organizer and wanting to do more. And now I'm on the board of directors. So shout out to them as well, NMAC and all the other organizations. And with that being said, I know you mentioned you worked at churches, you worked at different research projects and organizations, you worked in school settings and things like that. You've worked in a whole bunch of different settings. Is there any experiences or any organizations you specifically want to shout out and want to give praise to, even if it's your own and things like that? Because I know some people have side business on the side and they're doing, or maybe there's a book that you want to highlight or your own research projects that you want to give a shout out to.
So I'll mention a couple of things. I know I mentioned a few organizations a little bit ago. So I'll just mention those again. American Public Health Association, the Society for Public Health Education, NMAC. You already mentioned Advocates for Youth. I think there are many organizations to mention. So I'm really cautious. Even I just named a few, but I would still just encourage anyone who's interested to look for organizations that are aligned with your own interests. I will mention that a few things that I've been interested in recently have been related to having a better understanding for myself and generational wealth and generational health. And so I want to mention that because I didn't mention that before, and that's not in my bio, and that's not something we talked about. But I would just encourage others to really even learn more about their own generational wealth and health. And what I mean by that is, what is your wealth position, you yourself personally, your family's wealth position, and then also the next generation. And then how can you help to potentially pass on information, tools, resources, actual income, how can you pass that on to the next generation? And then also generational health. And what I mean by that is, what are you learning in the health space? And then how can you pass that on to the next generation? So, for example, with generational wealth, I'm really interested in real estate and how real estate influences health behaviors and health outcomes as well. So that's one thing that I'm digging deeper and learning more about. So Bigger Pockets is one of the platforms that I follow, and I listen, they have a podcast. You can listen to podcasts, participate in workshops and things like that. Earn Your Leisure is another example of, it's really even more than real estate, but they talk about generational wealth and finances and stock market and, a lot of different areas. And it also include health and sports and all of that, right? So I really do have an appreciation for Earn Your Leisure too. And I didn't mention that because that's not quote unquote public health, right? So I would just uplift them and say, if you're interested in kind of that mixture and that intersecting piece related to wealth and health, dig deeper and learn more about that. So you can listen to podcasts. You've already mentioned with the journal that I help to lead, Health Promotion Practice. We also have a podcast, so we have episodes every other week, and so we talk about papers that have been published in our journal. So I want to uplift again our journal and also our podcast. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, on X, on Blue Sky, and Substack. And so I would just encourage anyone to kind of, like I mentioned before, just think about what you're actually interested in and then start to reach out or listen to and read, more about the folks who are actually doing that work. So I would just mention that. And then I'll just end with what I mentioned before about rest being a form of resistance and just the literal healing power of rest, right? And so I want to reiterate, for everyone to just really take that to heart and think about how you can center yourself, ensure that you are refueling yourself, providing yourself the energy that you need. And, the NAP Ministry is a great platform to follow on Instagram. And you can read more. They talk about resting resistance and, read more about how you can help. You can do both, right? You can rest and recharge and also be productive, right? I don't think that we were created to run ourselves into the ground. And uh, you know, I think about when someone I knew, they said they would encourage everyone to live your dash, right? And think about when you pass away, when it talks about the born year and the dash and then the death year. It's like, what did you do in that dash? And on that, typically on that tombstone, we don't have things that are professional on that tombstone, right? We might have things like